So I'd like to invite the speakers to come up and sit in these chairs. I would join you, but Emily is going to take that mic for audience questions. Otherwise, I'd be sitting down with you guys. So, I mean, I don't want to make this about me and my questions. Just a quick show of hands. Are there any burning questions out there? And if not, I definitely have some stuff to get us started. Yeah, okay. I kind of want to poll the room. How many people would consider themselves representing like a smaller jurisdiction, maybe like under 40,000 people or 30,000? Okay, maybe about half. What about larger jurisdictions? Okay, yeah, half and half. Okay, well, let's kind of start with an easy one. And this was kind of covered in some of the presentations, but, you know, how do you define resilience in public buildings? You know, maybe, you know, I really liked the Oakland example of, you know, really leaning on the community for that. I'm also curious, you know, specifically for that example, if the definitions of resilience that the community were bringing up were different from, you know, Oakland staff, yours in particular, maybe USDN's definition, if there was any gap in between what the community wanted and what, you know, kind of the people that work on this stuff think about in terms of resilient buildings. Yeah.
There we go. Yes, we do notice a difference. And part of the homework that we've done is go visit other resilient spaces, listen to what they count as resilience. And I would say the community tends to think of a lot of more immediate needs because that's on their mind. And then sometimes they're not thinking about these bigger disruptions, like the big earthquake. And it's the city's job to bring that to the picture. I do think each site we do is going to have its own focus and different features, and it'll depend on the site and the existing building. Either of you want to chime in on that?
I think, you know, as the energy manager and somebody that's spent my career in the energy space, I think about resiliency from an energy perspective. However, stepping out of that and thinking about resiliency is really about meeting the human need in our communities. You know, we really need to understand what is it that people need and want and require to be resilient, to have a healthy and productive life. And some people need refuge from physical harm. That doesn't have to do with battery backup power, right? And so I think there's this big spectrum of what that resiliency looks like. And obviously, I think it's obvious to all of us that we need to make sure we're talking to the people that are going to be utilizing this, quote, resiliency center. So that's one point I want to make. I do also think that maybe just a quick little myth busting, right? Most people think when we say battery backup, we think, or just we're going to install a battery here. You know, most people just assume that there's going to be some resiliency component. And I know more battery projects than not that don't have a resiliency component, and we're just using it for, you know, energy arbitrage, you know, buying low, selling high, and peak demand shaving. So, you know, that's something that I've always had to kind of like educate my decision makers and stakeholders on that little myth. And, you know, yeah, anyway, I'll stop there.
I think I agree with you, Brendan, and kind of the human aspect of resiliency. When I think about just kind of tying it back into what I just talked about, you know, we're trying to build out a resilience hub, which means that in the case of an emergency or when people would otherwise be displaced, like we recognize that if they're coming to a resiliency hub, they are being displaced physically from you know, whatever the issue might be that we're facing, but allowing for people to function at their normal baseline or as close to it as possible, I think would be a successful resiliency hub. You know, we have as those in local government, we have our emergency operations centers, which it's like, this is core function. We need these things to happen in order for society to continue to function. And then you kind of think about the larger function of government and those things that we're trying to do in order to keep things normal. But people are being displaced, they're out of their homes, but that doesn't mean that they don't still have to go to work. That doesn't mean that they don't still have to live their lives. So I think as close as we can get, which I think ties back into Nick's presentation, I love the whole section of like, resiliency is not just about, having a place to go to be there and function from here, but you have your community that's using this space to do things when it's not functioning as a resiliency hub, looking at resiliency from a humanitarian standpoint. And I think that's really, really cool. So yeah, it's a big term for sure.
Thanks. I have one more selfish question, and then I'm going to pass it on to the audience. So listening to Nick and Elliot's presentation, it seems like part of the funding was a little serendipitous. Nick mentioned that there were some funding streams that came about, and Elliot talked about that community resilience grants from PG&E, from the lawsuit settlements. How important were those? Were those basically what made or break the project? And maybe segueing into Brendan, how can we think about how to, not rely on that funding or just make these measures more commonplace in like a capital improvement plan?
I can start. Yes, you're very right, which, we did have some serendipitous funding, which as someone who's, sat out here watching presentations like this, and seeing that question asked, like, what was the crux of this project? When it's like, oh, well, we got this massive grant. It's like, well, okay, cool. How do that doesn't help me. But still, to the point I kept driving home, we started off knowing that this is something that has to happen. I mean, these projects that we're talking about, like, they have to happen. We have these failing facilities with tons of failing infrastructure, and we have projects that have been sitting on our capital improvement plans for years and years. And unless you start them rolling, they're not going to happen. And so I think about the timelines that we're looking at for these projects. It's years, for some of these projects, and funding comes and goes. And I think that it's very encouraging that we're seeing that, renewables are now more affordable than fossil fuels. We're seeing some of these things turning around. So I think that you're always going to have funding challenges, and you're always going to have the people that are going to be really conservative when you're running your models and doing all these things. But it's part of our job to push forward and find that funding and just get creative and just keep searching for it, because it comes and goes. But these projects have to get done, so we have to push them.
Yeah, and I like your idea of being ready for those opportunities, of having that plan in place. But
I can add that the funding that we've earned through grants just accelerates the project. Oakland's capital improvement program is full of these projects that were submitted, accepted, and are waiting for funding from bonds or other grants. When you show up with $11 million from CDFA, it sort of gets everyone's attention and says that can move forward now. So there's some serendipity to it. I think this project would have been done over more years using bond funding, but we'd probably be a few steps back.
Okay, so brass tacks. If you have a BMS in your county or city, a building management system, like Elliot's project, they found $200,000 in scheduling, in how that equipment was operating. Many of the smaller jurisdictions are not going to have a robust control system, centralized control system, but it is a treasure trove of opportunity of savings. So that is one of the first places I would go to look for money that's right under our nose and that we can point to, and like Elliot's project, say, look, let's use that to cover some of the costs of these other projects. We have found hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollars in savings, and we're working through right now to kind of make those upgrades systematically to our 100+ county buildings. One thing I didn't mention, but was on one of my slides, is we had a Measure X, a sales tax that was passed a few years ago, generating about $100 million a year in our county. We created a sustainability fund, which was $2.5 million that we get for my program's work year over year. We've really worked to, and again, this is kind of a windfall. That's great, but we've made sure that the way that we prioritize those resources are trying to leverage it at every turn, and so there are some examples I can share if you guys want to talk about that after. That that really has allowed us to win grants because of that funding, because we have money on the table, match funding, and then also do smaller pilots to prove that a concept is valuable and leveraging it through. I will say the microgrid project I mentioned, it's 140,000 square foot office building. It's going to be mass timber. It's going to be beautiful. We too are going to have a party, so you guys are invited. That's going to break ground next spring. And the only reason I got to be at that design team table is because I asked a question to my supervisor, and I said, how do I get involved in this project? They emailed the top PM in this county administrator's office, and he said, well, just come to the meetings. And then all of a sudden, my influence was able to really support and push them towards towards this goal of a microgrid really loaded down with all kinds of DER, distributed energy resources. And another benefit I'm providing for that team is, that their $170 million building is over budget. And so even though we have some funding for the energy components, I'm saying, look, we can go out and get some creative financing to help pay for other aspects of that building that you want, even though I don't need the funding for my energy components here, but those components are have operational savings over time, and so we're leveraging creative financing to be able to pay for other parts of the project that have nothing to do with the energy component, right? So I just want to reiterate the creativity is a huge asset in creativity and winning people's hearts and minds.
Can I just quickly shout out the BayREN programs? Those actually help quite a bit. We're doing the decarb showcase at one of our libraries. That will be a resilient space, and it's $100,000. And that really did push that forward. And the fact that it has a due date on it helps cities like ours make a plan.
Yeah, thanks for the BayREN shout out. Yeah, let's turn it over to the audience. Emily has a microphone. So, yeah.
So my question is probably more towards Brendan, but generally we know that a lot of these projects take years and years and years. So I was curious, you mentioned you have quarterly report cards. What types of metrics are you reporting on regularly? And then how does that differ, if any, from your biannual report to your board?
So that's a great question. I will be honest. So we are, because Carter now has joined the team, we are really ramping up our reporting. And so we have some very basic kind of metrics right now, but the vast majority of our reporting has not yet taken place, right? So the basic savings or the basic metrics are going to be energy savings, dollar savings. That's kind of all where we're at right now. We've been doing a ton of EV charging infrastructure, and so it's port count, right? My main objective when they hired me into the role was we now have a vehicle purchasing policy that requires ZEV purchasing, zero emission vehicles, and we have no chargers, so get them in the ground. So it's like, okay, the key metric here for my entire job is port count, right? And how many facilities I can electrify in terms of parking stalls. So I may have been bluffing a little bit in my presentation. With Carter's help, we're going to build that quarterly report in our strategic energy management plan. We have a template of how we're going to report out, and that's these. In the plan, we have these key results, right? So we want to look at number of microgrid deployments, amount of demand response that we're shedding during peak, flex alerts and things like that. pretty basic and straightforward. But I do think when we start to talk about the people and policy chapter and goals of our work, we're looking at actually updating some of the job responsibilities for the folks in facilities that need to help us achieve our efficiency goals, right? It's not just one person, it's not just one team, but these goals are shared. The actions that create impact are shared across many teams and many people. And so that's another thing. How many job descriptions or responsibilities or scopes of work are we actually updating to make sure they reflect what we need to do in order to manage our energy assets effectively? So we can talk a little bit more after, but there's a lot of different hard and soft metrics that we're using.
Another question for Brendan. I was wondering how effective your internal incentives have been so far, because I think that's a great idea.
Now, I wasn't totally bluffing on this one, but we just haven't done it yet. This is the roadmap for the next 10 years that we talked about, right? But I think, again, like the example I shared was like, they don't really care about reducing utility costs. How do we make them care? How do we, what do you need as a department? I remember hearing an example a few years ago. I think it was Rachel DeFranco when she was at Fremont, about how the sheriff, I guess it was, or the PD, chief of PD, was like the main advocate for solar carports because they provided shade and refuge for their officers parking under the solar. Like that was the point. Is like, they had all this equipment to carry to and from their vehicles, and now they had this sheltered parking. And because of that person, that influencer was able to say, we want solar at all of our PD stations, right? And it was simple as that. And that's where I think it's a really great example of like people matter, right? They'll find the money. Oh, the sheriff said, this is what they want, right? So anyway, that's
I'm just laughing at it. It's like, it's wild how much we have to advocate for something that's like nothing but benefit, right? like there's investment, there's upfront cost, or if you find some way to finance things like solar, like it's showing savings. It's going to show savings. It's going to benefit the people that are passing under it every day, but we do have to fight really, really hard in order to get it put in the first place. And again, there's the champion, the person that pushed it through. Like we can scream into the void, but if you don't have that person that's going to really push it through, it's much more challenging. So,
and I'll say one more concrete thing, which is, okay, we have this $2.5 million a year. Now that shouldn't pay for 100% of my projects. It should be icing on the cake. So if a department head comes to me and says, we're going to build this and that, I can put a little bit more. I can say, use that bucket as an incentive to say, why don't you go a little further with efficiency? Why don't you go all electric, heat pumps, or what have you? Do more EV charging than what code requires. So that's one way that we're thinking about, using that sustainability fund as an incentive bucket, as opposed to what the expectation right now is, I pay for everything, which is not sustainable.
Hi. It's interesting, the discussion has kind of morphed from the presentations, which were for large individual projects that are long-term, to now you're actually even talking more about individual buildings and ongoing savings. Maybe talk a little bit more, you used the phrase, get them rolling, right? Can you, even for those buildings, have a partial energy efficiency related project put in that is consistent with the larger project, but essentially that starts having people understand the project and the savings, And also, of course, my question would tend also to include the small and mid-sized buildings, not just the larger buildings that might be part of the larger projects. Sorry, that was a general question, I guess.
Yeah. So I think I'm understanding the question. And I'll kind of refer back to this kind of larger comprehensive energy project that we're doing, which ultimately resulted in it's a $28 million project covering a number of county facilities, and a big part of that undertaking was, of course, understanding the return on investment, the cash flow, how we could actually make it pencil out to show that the projects overall are showing more savings than cost over the useful life of the projects, right? And during that process, stuff got weeded out. I mean, it definitely was not the project that we wanted it to be. I mean, it's great. We're very excited that it went through at the scale that it did. But there was, of course, more that we wanted to do, and that was kind of on the table at a certain point. But as we started showing that the cost effectiveness wasn't there, things started falling out. And full disclosure, one of our biggest challenges has been our internal capital improvements team. And working with them, and I can't say exactly why, but it's just been a big challenge. We're not part of that team, but we're there to help out and try and push things through. But so as things fell off, we found that they were actually picking some of those things up and adding them back into their own plans, which was very encouraging. A couple of the other vets halls lost. We couldn't work in the heat pump HVAC systems and show cost effectiveness. And when they fell off of this comprehensive energy project, they actually picked them up, and they've already gotten them done. So it's kind of like, I guess, yeah, we started pushing the ball, and it started, people started getting educated, understanding, where the benefits were in these things, and they saw that within their community, these things are going up, and like it's a big win. They see that the County Board of Supervisors is like, they love to see these projects get done. So kind of our hope is that even if we aren't involved in these things as they're moving forward, which we hope that we are, but even if we aren't, they still seem to be getting legs and getting done. So
I would say my energy projects in that realm have been hit or miss, and I'm learning a lot of lessons along the way of who at a city needs to be involved in these decisions, and it depends whether you're with the capital improvement program in Oakland. They are all very bought into the Equitable Climate Action Plan. Electrification is just what they do. Resilience is a bit new to them. And then I would say that our judgment on whether a project pays off has really changed with the tides of Oakland's budget. 2 years ago, a little easier, and then you have to make a stronger case recently. So we're opportunistic and try to adjust with the times.
Kirk, you want to answer from me?
You can push BMS. Okay.
Yeah. The thing that just comes to mind is in fighting kind of the hierarchical nature of our organization, when I joined the county, I was in capital projects, and I had to go through the capital project manager, who was not the strongest advocate for the work. And I felt very isolated in what my role was. And essentially it was a construction project manager for any project that had energy benefits. So whether it was solar or EV charging, I was getting into contract. I was working with architects, getting into contract with contractors, and then overseeing their construction work on the ground, like in the trenches, which I did not have a background in. It was fun. I appreciated that experience. But over that next year and a half, I effectively advocated to get out of that team, and I got put into kind of the Public Works Administration division. And so I was reporting now to the Deputy Director of Public Works, which was very helpful, and have standing meetings with my former boss's boss, where I can say, here's the goals, look what the board has approved in our strategic energy management plan. Can you help me move capital projects in the right direction? And again, back to one person being able to have, share direction for our capital projects teams to make sure that that our goals are represented in their work. And one of the things that I'm partnering with this deputy director on is this updating the design and construction guide to make sure that we have a higher standard of, make sure our BMSs are not only in the buildings, but we're working with the company that we hire to maintain and operate some of the programming with that BMS, which doesn't always happen, right? And so, anyhow.
We have time for about one more. Yeah.
Thanks. Can you speak to the importance of spending the money on the investment grade audit and where you think that belongs in kind of the overall, if it's like a large project with many projects within it or within the program, where does that fit? And then at what point do you decide, okay, we need to spend the money to refine the cost estimates? Because I think you flagged sometimes the technical assistance cost estimates are not the same as your construction costs. And yeah.
Yep, I can talk to that. Yeah, so definitely highlighted, the ZNE project that we did with BayREN and having that rough order of magnitude pricing. I mean, that came to us at no cost, right? Which obviously that's a massive win, for the county to actually have something that demonstrably shows a number. It was not the most accurate when we got into actually getting the project worked out, but also we did it in 2019, right? And we entered into contract in like 2024. So it's like 5 years later after getting this rough order of magnitude pricing. So I think that first off, it was one of the lessons learned is just expect that if you are starting off getting some rough order of magnitude pricing, it's probably not the most practical number, but it gets you started. That's the snowball.
And I'm assuming those prices went up.
They went up. Yes, correct.
Just checking.
They went up, yeah. But in terms of, actually getting the investment grade audits done, as we were moving that project forward, the overall comprehensive energy project, I mean, within our office, we were so back and forth when it came down to actually putting the item in front of the board to say, will you commit to this project and this funding? I mean, we had no idea if it was going to go forward. Like we were 50-50 on if it was moving forward at all. Because it was expensive and because it was this big deal that there was like a lot of internal conflict over whether or not it should happen. But we looked at those investment grade audits as a win. I mean, that was a huge win. If we came out of this whole process that took 5 years and like all we got out of it was a solid accounting of everything that existed in all of our facilities and like kind of next steps to making improvements, that was a big win. The structure through which we got all this done through the Sustainable Solutions Turnkey program, since there was this potential large scope, as we looked at the pricing that we were getting for our investment grade audits, we looked at it and thought ultimately that what they were putting out there as the number for those IGAs was very reasonable. Like it was a good cost for IGAs for 67 facilities. And that's effectively, when we first went to the board, what we were on the hook for was the cost of these investment grade audits, because if we didn't move forward with any of the projects, we were going to have to pay for those IGAs. When you're stepping into work like this, what you find is that in practice, you're not going to have an IGA run by someone and then take that IGA and then use it to, put together an RFP, because from there, anyone else that would be doing that work is going to want to go in and confirm everything that they've found, right? So like it's going to be, it would be a nice document to have for function and for planning and stuff, but it's something that would have to be undertaken again if we decided to not move forward with whoever was put in front of us following that IGA. So I don't know if that really answers the question. It was the price that we got for ours, what we felt was very reasonable, but we wanted to make sure that we looked at that report as a big win overall in providing something to our capital improvements team to say, look at all this. You have all this stuff, and a lot of it they hadn't documented themselves. So it's very valuable. And sorry if that didn't answer the question. I'm not sure.
Yeah, I'll just add, for me, it's not so much the cost, because that can change obviously pretty dramatically, but the scope. What do we want to do in these facilities? What opportunity exists? And so having armed with a scope of work, it can help you advocate internally. And you know, I think the costs will come later and shake out. But you know, oftentimes I know there's opportunity. I just don't have any. I don't have any kind of detail, and that's really helpful to be able to support effective communication with decision makers.
I have had a very similar experience with these two with reports. I would just add that there seems to be like a psychological win there when you have a nicely put together report from experts who have really talked through it with you, and have that and put that into a grant application or project plan. It does help.
Great. Well, we're going to give you guys a break. Sorry, we don't have any more time for questions. But Brendan, Nick, Elliot, thank you so much. Are you going to be sticking around for a little bit? Okay, great. So we're going to take a 5-minute break.